No? Are you ready?
Okay, let's rock and roll. We have a quorum. Yay. So I call to order the CCB committee meeting on Wednesday, November 13th, 4 at
6:37.
6:37. Thank you. In order of the festival, please call the roll.
Ms. Alexander? Here. Dr. Applewhite? Here. Mr. Brandhorst?
Here.
Mr. Carabello? Mr. Cassell?
Here.
Ms. Clark? Mr. Davis? Ms. Emerson?
Here.
Ms. Grimes?
Here.
Ms. Janney? Ms. Jones?
Here.
Ms. Lamb?
Here.
Dr. Livingston? Mr. Mohammed? Mr. Narain?
Present.
Ms. Newman? Ms. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Pierce? Ms. Randall? Ms. Scriber? Ms. Stevens? Ms. Steffenshaw?
Here.
And Ms. Wilkins?
Here.
Next is public comment. Do we have anybody signed up for public
We
comment?
have one.
Can I just do it here? Or do I have to get up at the podium?
If you turn your microphone on.
Oh, phenomenal. Okay, hi. Oh, God. Okay, hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Jones, and I'm usually here wearing the hat of the alum, and I have a second hat being a member of Apple, African American Parents for Purpose of Leadership and Education. And something that I wanted us to consider is that 2 months ago, when we met in person, we talked about, or at least my group had the scenario of the two students fighting over the boy in the cafeteria, and that kind of like, how do you deal with that situation? And I think we have a great hypothetical solution, but I want to bring to our attention that these issues are, or similar, are actually happening in our schools, and I want us to consider the consequences and the actual behavioral actions and disciplinary things that are happening to these students. So I just wanted to bring to our attention, we are having kind of these like group think tank conversations. We're talking about the B side. What does it actually look like if one student is pulled to the side or considered suspension or expulsion? What does that look like, and how can this committee actually put into some type of change of what those policies look like? I think we're getting to a certain point of the conversation, and then we are just like, that was a great exercise, without considering that these are actually scenarios that are happening to our present students. Thank you.
Thank you. Approval of minutes. I move to approve the September 18th for cultural final behavior training. It's as presented, any corrections or adjustments to be made. Hearing none, do I hear a second?
A second.
All those in favor say aye. Any opposed?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. For those of you who joined us in October, you'll remember that we went to the screening of the movie that was here at the school. Part of the reason that I wanted to, and I suggested that we went to that movie is because the topic for this month was very much aligned with the topic from the movie. For those of you who were not able to make it, there was a viewing of just and a discussion with young men from the football team of a high school who were dealing with the topic of toxic masculinity and how that shows up in our young people for today, in today's schools, and what they're dealing with in terms of grappling with issues and the way that society has told them they have to act and how they are supposed to show up in our public spaces. And the topic for today, as you saw it on the agenda, is all about gender inequalities in terms of harassment. And so one of the things I wanted to point out just and before we go into the work for today is just with the movie, understanding that our young people are playing roles that have intentionally or unintentionally been placed upon them by the society that we live in and how they are raised. And that plays out in different ways here at the school and also in the world. And so in the movie, you heard a lot about the young men, no matter what they were going through, talking about how they couldn't cry. So you had all this pent up aggression that was coming from not being able to let it out in a way that has become a norm. I don't know it to ever have been different in our country where men weren't taught it's okay to cry and to have feelings about things, and people weren't telling them to man up or to, pull yourself together. But I think what we're missing is the fact that that manifests itself in other ways as they are dealing with just life issues, and comes out in the way of sometimes abusive language or actions that we might see played out with young people, sometimes boy to boy, but also in the mix of genders in terms of liberties. And what students last year, when they were speaking about our sexual harassment, just the lack of understanding of consent, when you have consent and what that looks like. And you'll see in one of our scenarios today, if someone's passed out, doesn't mean that drinking and passing out means that because the person can't answer it, there you have consent. And we often have times where we question is like, what's even happening in that? And is that even part of the conversation? But that's something that's been on the mind of our young people in terms of teaching consent and how we are teaching that in our curriculums here at the school, primarily in our PE programs. But I'm bringing that so that when we do our scenarios, you are kind of keenly aware of the topics we heard in the movie as we're looking at the topics that we're dealing with today. And so the public comment that we heard today, very important to know that we don't have to go far to put these scenarios together because we live in an environment where they are playing themselves out. And we are always dealing with you, but they're all youth who belong to people who love them. So it's hard when we think about sides and what BEP is supposed to do in terms of being our code of conduct, how we're addressing these things. I was talking to David as we were putting this together and just thinking about this question as we're going through this, because ultimately we are here to discuss the BEP in the spring and whether or not that document is doing what we feel it needs to do in addressing concerns of discipline in the building. The question I have for you is that BEP bringing the required, and I put in quotes, justice to our learning environment that everyone is expecting? And that is supposed to be as complex as it sounds, because I want us to dig into that as we're thinking about these topics, because there's a different sense of justice that is looked at on each side, right? And so it becomes a whose justice are we trying to address, and is the BEP doing that as we would have expected when we created it and introduced it to replace our code of conduct, which used to be about just what are punishments for actions. This was all about restoration, making sure that young people are learning different ways of living life and dealing with challenging situations, and not necessarily punishing. But then what does that look like? And how are we making sure that there's still justice being served? Okay, so we're going, go ahead.
Just wanted to add to that, the BEP is a little misleading in that it makes you think, okay, we have identified a misconduct, now let's find it in the book, and go down the line and apply this book. And the situations that we bring to you in these scenarios are purposefully much more complicated than that, because as Linda said, there's more than one side. There are often more than one misconduct on either side, but in a greater sense, we are also accountable to not just the people involved in the misconduct, but to the school community. And that's the really, really difficult thing when we have incidents that may not involve everybody in the school, but we have witnesses to that, we have classes that are disrupted, or we have people that are made to feel unsafe. And one of the difficult questions that we do grapple with is, what is our responsibility in applying the BEP to restoring a sense of safety in the school? That doesn't mean that we should make examples of kids. The BEP is built to have us not do that, as a matter of fact. But at the same time, people lose trust in the system begins to collapse. So we have to apply it fairly and consistently, but we also have to hold ourselves accountable to restoring the community. And the question of what that means is going to vary from scenario to scenario.
So, and our groups are going to be smaller today, just as we're a smaller group, but I'm going to have you count off by 4, starting with 10.
1,
2,
3, 4. 2, 3, 4, 1.
Yes. And then, I'm gonna have you get into your groups before I pass out the information, and David is going to give you a copy of the BEP, because you will need those for those exercises. And I'm gonna try to do our room like north, south, east, west. So this is north in the world, so north will be here, number 1, group 1, right in the chairs. And then we'll do east for number 2, group 2. And then we'll do south right here for number 3, and then number 4 can take this area closest to Ed. And while you're moving to your groups, just keep your ears open, because I'm going to just read the guiding principles of our BEP to help center us in our work. Because if we don't keep our principles in mind, it will start to change when we're reading things, because we feel things. And so we don't want to always lead with our emotions. We kind of want to, yes, I went in 1, 2, 3, and then 4. When we decided to take this approach as a district, we followed the following key guiding principles that drive this work. We are grounded in a strong focus of engagement and learning. Whenever possible, we avoid exclusionary practices. We believe in teaching and intervention over consequences and punishment. We support progressive discipline, not zero tolerance. We believe that strong school-family partnerships are important. We will use disaggregated data to identify disparities, monitor progress, and drive decisions. We believe that every child, when provided with appropriate support, can learn and succeed. We support proactive problem solving on behalf of students. So that is are the principles that guided us in creating this behavior education plan. And so I want us to keep that in mind as we look at our scenarios, and then speak to what we have to do in order to help correct behavior and to teach students different ways to be. We're gonna pass out scenarios. Your number for your group corresponds with the scenario you will be working on.
So guys, think about, well, first, we do the questions at the top. So the same questions apply to each of the groups. And obviously take time to read the scenario out, have a discussion around those 3 questions. I think we should probably be able to do that in about 10 minutes.
That's gonna be 7 exactly, and I'm setting a timer, so. 7, it's 10 minutes, 6:50 right now.
A lot. I don't.
Oh. Thank you.
I, or I'm thinking, recording with another person. Rachel.
So to me, this is like beyond, like just beyond, like anything that I guess when I think about, like, this is almost like you're expecting something to go wrong versus like, this is a sensitive response rate, so we do something better, right? Because like, I think that like, these things are sort of like, what it would be. It's almost like if you didn't have anything better to do, you would do it, right? So like, what about? I don't know. I am surprised at that.
And there's nothing like that to this. It's like one business. That picture was inappropriate. Oh, what's the picture? Record images of another person. Right. The second prompt, making, because it's not a picture. The first prompt was to teachers, the second prompt was to address. Without the consent of the person, so they.
Right, I just kind of feel like by the time you get to that.
Recording the image, so it seems like both things happen. The language wasn't gonna kill you, was that the language that you were thinking?
Yeah, because it's one of those serious threats, including.
It's funny that you and I identified differently.
Yeah, so that's still, I mean, this
From where we disciplinary,
so.
system and we.
The language didn't stand out to me.
We're doing things that we're not.
I don't mean
To me, it's
I
like.
don't mean to minimize it, I'm just,
Because the first, so
We'll just create a different standard for.
Charles gets threatened by Robin, but
Now,
Charles
unfortunately,
to
that
the
meant, or do data,
those two
or
steps.
students have their own.
well, I mean, you could almost accuse them both of bullying.
Well, exactly, yeah, so.
If that happened in your classroom, I'm gonna kill you.
So bigger boundaries that the high school had not dealt with before. So it makes it
That happens in class, like.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed immediately.
So you would call somebody.
Dress code.
Yeah.
You know, have your own backpack.
Anyway, So anyways, I think we do
They
have
said,
to.
if we don't list it down, there's some
We
students
have
versus
to, it is something we guys can't.
Yeah,
Right, because if there's.
So yes,
And he was.
Exactly. But their son was.
Horrible.
Oh.
So. Can we talk about Robin? Like, my understanding of the retaliation doesn't absolve you.
No, of course not. Yeah, they should know. They
Like Robin shouldn't have that killed. And now, does that fall into, Charles, yeah, Charles probably has a bad day. And it probably, did trigger a big four. Maybe even 2, 3, or 4. But then turning our attention back to Robin. Oh, absolutely, and triggers again, 2, 3, and 4. And I get this would be which,
So.
I mean, my issue with this was Charles.
I mean, I very clear about like the
Well,
reforming,
You know,
how much you can gain.
that is something
Isolation.
Charles.
Like if you're here, anywhere, like,
Charles statement, you're talking about S number 1, you're talking about we would charge, for lack of a better term, Robin with the month as well.
For that time.
Sounds like that we can extend the time. So we will do an extra 5 minutes.
So that was my thought.
There's still needs to be some.
Alright, so.
I just missed that, and I should.
Yeah, we don't really know.
Exactly.
We have to.
So.
When Robin wrote that Robin didn't meet, I immediately
Then, oh, yeah.
Robin's statement that in no way was Robin going to kill Charles. But you, and I appreciate your perspective, when you're saying that you have to take that as your value.
Yes.
Because it's horrible.
Yeah, because if he did.
No. So then that would mean that Robin, and that would be charged, for lack of a better term, placing the student in reasonable fear of harm. The person.
Yep.
Yeah.
But also then as they coming out. Charles has.
How significant.
Like, you never know, because like, if he is out in Washington,
Of what their expectations were.
So
it's a little bit different because the workplace.
he could be.
Robin.
Yeah, because he's not.
Robin, yeah, for sure. So then really, if looking at this, both Robin and Charles could be charged with 1, 2, 3, and 4. Or am I overstating it?
We have.
like, I almost feel like, even with this scenario.
Sure.
Right, like I almost feel like
And
I like
this,
that.
you know, for Charles.
My child.
I mean, like a very personal, like from Robin's perspective, Robin's whole psyche. Robin was bathed in feeling,
Exactly.
right? So
what would be
it's kind of that.
Yeah. It's always one of their things, because, you know.
So absolutely, for both. This to level 3.
Well. So. And so Robin did not have a promise. That might just be.
And would, because that, our next question was prong 3, was what restorative, what does restorative justice mean? I mean, honestly, how would we, administrators, put Robin in the same space as Charles? And how would Robin feel safe?
Have a little less than 2 minutes.
Will we put them together?
I don't think
2 minutes. Right, okay. Yeah. Right.
So.
One is.
If I personally were Robin,
Like that.
I would not.
I think. It's not because like, I'm just like, I'm so many just looking
In
at
restorative justice. Robin, throwing comment. I'm so quick to. Should
Every day.
Yeah. And in that regard,
Oh.
Robin. It's actually more
It's
horrible. What Charles did was really made Robin potentially unsafe for others.
Exactly. So.
Robin was right.
Guys, okay?
Right, that's my thinking.
20
Maybe-
seconds.
Sometimes.
I don't know.
Discuss stuff, but yeah, prepare for a peace circle. I think that goes with that third bullet, prepare for a peace circle.
I would say, well, I think materials are needed. I would declare restorative conversation between first. It's just getting like
Correct, a staff.
Charles. Yeah, and then.
So we're.
That's time.
That is my idea.
I don't know if it's restorative, just bring you all back together.
You know, like that's.
All right, guys, we'd like to share out from each of the groups, but it can also, obviously lead into a whole group discussion. So if you haven't taken a look at the other scenario, I'm gonna glance at them. I was thinking as we go backwards, because, group 4, at least on paper, has the longest scenario, and they had an additional question. So we'll start with them. This scenario at its root, as you're skimming it, is on the surface initially about a threat, but ultimately about social media and a student who is kind of outing another student on social media around their status as non-binary. Obviously without their consent, and this leads to a fallout and a friendship. No violence. Trying to stick to the issues and needs of harassment, discrimination, and or bullying. The definition of bullying is also on this page as well. That's often a topic that comes up in a word that is used. So we wanted to kind of mix that in there. We'll start with group 4. There may be more than one answer here. What did you guys think about the misconduct that was committed and where this falls in the DEP?
So we did think it could fit under bullying. There were other ones too. There was the image that was taken, the reportings of another person, inappropriate language and or expression. But when we looked at bullying and how it can, a student might feel reasonable harm, like we thought that Charles could have felt reasonable harm and wouldn't have been able to go to lunch, which that's number 4, being, interfering with students' ability to participate in or benefit from the services, activities, or privileges provided by the school. would have been worried perhaps, so that's two. Don't know, did feel like it's going on long enough to potentially impact academic performance, but maybe perhaps that day they were so distracted they couldn't take the quiz or test, so it could, so we thought that it might fall under bullying. And then we also thought that Robin was also bullied in a way, since they were being outed, and could potentially then be feeling unsafe in the future. And also their mental health has been negatively impacted. So we thought that also as this whole situation comes out, like through multiple sides, as we're talking about restorative justice, that justice is for like multiple people here. And there's also the parents is wanting some kind of justice as well, and may not want to really hear that their son had bullied Robin. So it's very complicated, but we also thought then Robin was bullied by Charles.
Yeah, basically, neither was a good actor here.
Right.
It's more complicated than it seems just on its face.
I'm gonna complicate things just a little further because the words I heard you saying when you were speaking, Stephanie, was it could have caused. From what you read, do you read it having caused at this moment?
As to who?
Either one of the young people, because you said that it could cause academic performance drop in the future, or it could interfere with their activities. Do you read from what is reported it actually being that?
So no to the academic impact because there's no mention of it. But I think with everything else, it is in there. And say 3 out of the 4 does indicate bullying.
I tend to agree.
Okay. And this is important, and I'm sorry, Dave, because this is what goes into the facts versus the feelings in terms of what is really being said and what's there, and then how we feel it may be the child may be reacting to it. And that is something that deans have to unpack as they're having the conversation, because these things sound like they could happen, and I always think of the movie Minority Report, where it was like, get the person before the action actually happens, but then it became this ethical dilemma of, can you arrest someone on what you thought was going to happen, as opposed to what actually happened, which was nothing at the moment. So go ahead.
Yeah,
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's definitely no right or wrong answer. All of the scenarios are open. Where this usually falls in discussion, comes down to looking at the words severe or pervasive first. So not just the 1, 2, 3, 4, but also, this was a one-time incident, and,
It's not
with the
pervasive, but
bullying,
it seems severe.
it may seem severe. So again, if this were real life and not just something on paper, we'd have more tools to assess how severe it is based on interactions with the students, and dealing with the scenario. So in this one, like you said, it could be, but when the deans are dealing with these scenarios in real time, we start with whether something is pervasive and happening frequently enough to cause significant harm, as opposed to a one-time instance that could be repaired through some restorative work. But absolutely, it is written in a way where it'd be a little ambiguous to try to figure out.
If I could just add right quick, like for me, when I first read this, I was,
Speak in the mic.
oh, sure.
Thank you.
I was quick to dismiss Charles' fear of being murdered by Robin. And Stephanie brought me back to reality and said those ones are horrible and they're actionable, like they would make someone potentially feel unsafe. I was just very distracted by they did not mean it literally, but from my perspective, what happened to Robin seemed worse overall to me. And upon first reading this, and maybe, I could kind of examine myself and where I even landed on those places. But one thing I want to question, David, one thing that you said was that do you focus on the severe or pervasive? Do you focus on pervasive more than severe, or do you use the or as written?
I think it starts with pervasive. Severe presents itself anyway. So usually, unfortunately, severe presents itself in the way that the situation comes to us because somebody is reacting in an extreme way. So we're going to have the severity, and then we start with, looking at the details, gathering the details of how long has this been going on for, how frequent is it, things like that.
Because I was kind of looking towards the future and do we change the or clause to something else? If pervasive is more your concern or more, when you finally see it severe, so severe is assumed or what have you.
And this is actually not our definition, this is from the Illinois State Board of Education website, which is our definition, I'm just saying we didn't write it.
Right, okay, got it.
So, we adopted the same language.
Thank you.
Yeah, when the deans dig through these, they're often very layered. And of course, going back to the question of I'm gonna kill you, also want to let you guys know that we have something called a threat assessment protocol. Anytime something like that comes up, where a student would be interviewed, if there's a gun threat or something like that, we look at whether or not they actually have the tools to carry out whatever threat they made. So how likely is it? Look at their past history, talk to the social worker, look at the IEP if they have one, but do they have access to weapons and have they ever had thoughts of using them in the past? So there's a lot that goes into trying to determine if a threat is real or not. That doesn't always make everybody feel safe or comfortable when the answer comes back that some team in interviewing a kid has determined that it's not a credible threat. Because there's also the issue of confidentiality, and everything that we talked about in that interview cannot be shared with the other party. They just have to trust that somebody has run through a protocol. And that's the difficult work. Where did we get with, what does restorative justice look like for each of you?
This was a much tougher question because I assume from Robin's perspective that Robin would not want to sit down with any kind of conversation with Charles, maybe not right away, and that the initial restorative piece would probably be with a dean or social worker or some other staff member with Robin and Charles separately until they could get to the point of speaking together.
In a perfect world.
Yes. I was just about to say too, and to go back to what we said at the very beginning in terms of how we teach our children. I have seen kickers in Super Bowl games get threats on their life if they miss the kick that loses the game for that team. And so when you're thinking about credibility of threats, because if you're alive, there is a way that has been created by this world for you to kill someone. It just exists, right? But when we think about how we throw those words around, like how we just do that, we threaten people just because they didn't sing the song we wanted them to sing at the concert we paid for. Like we're in a society where we have to dig past the words to get to the actual intent that a person has so that we're using the real words, right? You are upset about what? Let's unpack that, because you can't just stay at the words that threaten, because people think about driving in a car and when someone cuts you off and what you are feeling in that moment. We emote a lot, but it's important for us when we're teaching kids about change, like, why did you use that word? Because we have to unteach that way you expressed yourself to say, what I really meant was, stop doing this to me because it upsets me. But those aren't the words we're taught to say. We're taught to like get that person off of me by threatening them, right? But if you were to punish every threat, everyone would be behind a bar somewhere. Bars, not the bar, but the bars. So I say that just to say, think that as we're doing this, because nothing that comes to discipline doesn't sound or look horrible when you see it on video. Like it just looks bad. Like I'm always like, oh, this is horrible, right? But you have to get past that to get to the how do you teach them so that they will sit at the table and say, you really hurt me when you did such, and if that be okay, and that the person can receive it to say, I feel awful about that, which is where we're really trying to get the people. I'm sorry, we're running.
And just really quickly, I want to tell you that Charles would absolutely be spending some time in the in-school reflection room where he would be doing some work around empathy and working on figuring out, if anything, what can be done to restore Robin. If Robin refuses to sit down, I've encouraged the deans to think creatively around, could there be a letter that's written? If they don't want to sit face to face with you, can you put your thoughts down on paper and hope that they will read them? What can we do to try to at least bring us closer together and express that Charles has learned something.
Would Robin not spend, would Robin not spend time in that, in school?
It's possible. It's possible. Again, depending on interviews and how the situation played out, but it is quite possible, yes.
And the level of persistence of this, meaning was this just when the straw broke the camel's back, or was this the one time this happened? Because that is Robin's story too.
Okay, we want to move on to scenario 3. This is the one where there's a classroom discussion going on and the topic of transgender students comes up, and one student makes some very offensive comments. And the class does not back down from them, in fact, doubles down on them and returns to class. What did
Three over here. All right, so what misconduct was committed in what category? The conduct that was committed was a failure to respond to the teacher's redirection. And then there was several things. Then there was the baiting and encouraging a classroom disruption, which fall under the category of disruptive and uncooperative behaviors. Okay. The thing that hit me first, and then I discussed with Karen, was why is student A insisting on this behavior? And I think that has to be addressed in any sort of remediation, because if you don't address the student's motivation for deliberately disrupting a class after a teacher has pulled them out of class, talked to them about, what kind of language she used, and now we're going to go back in and try and reintegrate them in a positive manner. And yet the student still persists in the behavior. Clearly, that did not make the intended impact. So why is the student doing this? What does the student trying to get? Is it about attention? Is it that the student is threatened by the conversation? And then this is an attempt to derail a conversation that is making the disruptive student more disruptive. I mean, I don't know. And I don't think anybody would want to say, try to talk to the student, right? And that's what kind of troubled me about scenario 4 is that nobody was looking at why Charles was going after Robin with the microaggression of, haha, it was a joke. No, it wasn't a joke. It was serious, and there's a name for that. It's a microaggression. So I'm seeing something similar. We are seeing something similar here. Now, what does restorative justice mean for each person in the scenario? Well, for student A, I'm not sure what would restore student A's equilibrium or sense of justice without knowing why student A is doing this, right? As far as the teacher's been disrespected. And the teacher has now lost control of the situation. So asking the student to leave, right? I mean, I think the student is escorted down. Yeah, the student is escorted down to the dean. It's a temporary solution because the kid has to come back to class. And then the other students who have been robbed of their education, right? And maybe they want an answer to what's going on. So restorative justice, what restorative justice means to those 3 different parties. Again, it's hard to say without knowing why.
What we find helpful is to look at it and say, what would happen in a perfect world? In a perfect scenario, after the wrong has been done, what would it look like?
Well, the student would comply with the teacher's request in the hall, come back in and address the class. They can still have the same feelings, but do it in a way that is open to conversation rather than shutting down everybody, because that's what it looks like what the student is trying to do by continuing in the behavior.
And I don't want to get into the topic of, the student may very well have been taught a certain thing about this topic that may be coming home, the parent might even reinforce it. So the question is it our job to correct that in the setting? Or is the closest we're gonna be able to get is to teach them the empathy and learn when to expect or agree to disagree on certain topics so that we are not disrupting the learning environment. Those are the grades of where we look to where can we get as close to as possible a perfect scenario. Some cases we land perfectly where everybody learns and understands and hugs it out. And in other cases yeah. They're definitely difficult. We had a similar scenario in scenario 2, similar topic, different place setting. This one in the bathroom. So this one, the students didn't, one student is complaining to the principal, principal's looking into it. But a student was using the girls' restroom, and according to the complaining student, they look like a boy. And there's a lot of wondering about why can't they use the gender neutral? Shouldn't they be made to use the gender neutral? And the other student is wondering the same thing.
Okay, so, where we thought this would fall under was the inappropriate language and or expression, because student A was, yelling at student B, who is the one that, she's mad is using the girls' bathroom. And cursing at them every time that they interact with each other in the restroom, and we thought that, in this case, most of the restorative justice would be being done for student A, because student B didn't actually do anything wrong at all. Because they're using the bathroom in which they feel most comfortable.
Is everybody familiar with the restroom policy here at OPR? Any clarification on what that is?
I could use some clarification.
Okay, I'll let Ms. Parker give that clarification.
So where we have single-use gender neutral bathrooms, we also have multi-use stalls in our school that are marked still with male and female gender. But at the school, students are allowed to use the bathroom they identify with without question. So does not matter what you present as by someone's vision, you are allowed to use the restroom of your choice, regardless of stall number or not. We do have one multi-stall bathroom that is also gender neutral. It only has 2 stalls in it, and it's only located on the 2nd floor. We do have different changing areas for students who are gender non-conforming, who don't want to change in the dressing rooms in the PE area of male or female, because those are still marked that way, except for that one. But students are allowed to use whichever restrooms they choose to.
And a lot of that guidance does come down from the state, and many other public institutions have moved away from labeling restrooms as men's or women's, boys or girls, and just describing what equipment is in the bathroom. Do we have stalls or urinals or a combination?
Okay, and then we thought cause something that was important is that student A was saying, oh, I feel unsafe coming into this bathroom because student B is in there. But we were talking about again, which we've referenced this before, is the difference between being unsafe and uncomfortable, because student A is not actually unsafe in that space because student B is just minding their business. Student B hasn't done anything at all to make that student feel unsafe. And student A just feels uncomfortable being in the bathroom with them, and then is then attacking student B for that. So what we thought would be the right course of action would be restorative conversation, and then maybe eventually a conversation between those 2 students, but similarly to yours, you can't require student B to have a conversation with student A about that, because it's not their job to educate student A on how they feel. But we were saying it would be probably the best course of action to have them each have a conversation with a dean or a social worker, like you were saying, a restorative justice person that we have at this school, and just talk about or especially to student A about how that, impacts others and like, you know, we were saying that what's the reason that student, similar to that, what's the reason that student A feels uncomfortable in a situation, like maybe there's some past trauma or something that's causing her to act in that way. So just getting to the root of that and then seeing if maybe they would wanna have a conversation with each other in the long run, which I think would be helpful if they were to.
I'll tell you sadly, where a lot of these end up, where we have people who are not willing to participate in restorative processes, and nobody has necessarily done anything wrong, so there's not anybody that is going to the in-school reflection room. Often have to set up guidelines for how everybody can move around and feel safe. We have multiple bathrooms, how can we find you a bathroom or a gender neutral single stall, where you can use the water restroom. And feel safe. This group brought up inappropriate language or expression, and, I should have mentioned that with the previous scenario as well. That, on surface, it seems to be about racial slurs, but if you dig into it a little deeper, there's also any comments, about, any protected class as well. So, transgender being a protected class, inappropriate language or expression could have applied as well in the scenario.
And just a note of transparency, because this principal did deal with a situation like this. No one is supposed to be lingering in the bathrooms just to linger. So I do address students who go into the bathroom, no matter who they are, what they look like, if they're just staying in there. So I will tell people, you go to the bathroom, and then you have to come out and go to class. So if there's a case where in this situation, they were all standing, say, by the mirror. We don't stand by the mirror for 15 minutes, is that like everybody has to go to class, so there is a moving us along that happens too.
Can I make a quick comment though about the single gender bathrooms here? As a sub here, I often only have a minute and a half to run to the closest bathroom between classes. And I never go into the single gender bathrooms, and let me tell you why. They are filthy. They are absolutely filthy. Every time I've gone into one during the school day, they are just, there's toilet paper everywhere. There's water splashed everywhere. There's garbage on the floor. It's almost as if somebody has stepped in to vandalize.
Can I make a quick suggestion too? When you're back in your room, if you have a moment on your email, you can shoot an email to B&G and just say third floor, yes, and let them know it's that, so that they can handle it, because someone will be attentive to it. Yep.
You're bringing up the difficulty as we as a society, change and grow in these, that it presents other types of logistical problems, and that those, there's no way to go in and clear out a bathroom like there is in the multi-use bathrooms. Security regularly goes and sweeps those and says everybody's time's up, and the gender neutral.
And they're very
safe space.
And it's habits again. So I talk about how we're raised, because as a woman, women have a lot of signs in our bathroom that tell us different things. And I'm always like, do we still need these signs? And then I will go to a bathroom and say, oh, yes, we do. So it's very interesting that what's common is not common.
Wait, what kind of signs?
No, we won't talk about that. They're not urinals on the wall. That's also.
Separately, you can use it, tone separate.
Yeah. The women do, they're like, yeah.
All right, let's go to scenario one. Also, this one is very involved. So we're dealing with this stalking and clear harassment case, with a relationship that's broken up, but there are also inappropriate pictures involved. I should note, I didn't actually write this in here, all of this happened off campus. There's no indication that anything actually happened within the school building here. And that does play a role, not sure if you all considered it, in looking at the BEP as well. So what do you guys think?
We did. We had a very fruitful conversation. First, I want to answer the questions and then get into the discussion. So initially, I said, I said bullying. Recording images of another person, and then sexual explicit obscene or nude materials. Those were the categories. Second, restorative justice, I said, I'm not sure, restorative justice is still a new, I've heard of it, but it's the concept on how that applies to what I deem as justice is new. But for me, I would say that the young man who has this material would delete them and permanently delete them. Second, the young woman would get an apology from the young man. And then the young woman would be able to be made whole in her classes. So whether that is reassigning her to a different section, giving her the materials that she missed out on, you know, due to her absence because of this person. And I guess that's not I guess, and just having a conversation, you know, with the people that were involved. So the dean, if there's a counselor, social worker, whomever. As far as restorative justice, I would say this is a conversation. The conversation about, excuse me, how much parenting does the high school do, came up. And I think that while this happened off campus, this young woman is being stalked by her boyfriend, who is a student here also. And I think it's a different situation, a different scenario if they went to Hillside or Proviso West, and then she's coming here and has this idea, but this person is also within the school ecosystem. And so restorative justice is having a conversation. Why was it inappropriate to even have, take materials of her while she is unable to give consent? Also have a conversation with her about underage drinking. I think it's always a sticky situation to address both negative behaviors and both bad decisions that were made, but not excusing the other person because of it. Like, well, you were underage drinking, so therefore the pictures aren't that bad. No, address both. So restorative justice will look like having a conversation and then separating. I think that the second half with the parenting, I think having been in a similar situation with a friend, you don't talk to your parents about this, even if it happened off campus. You're more comfortable, or you may have a better relationship with your counselor or with your dean, and you feel more comfortable sharing it with them. This young lady did not feel comfortable bringing her parents because of the material or because of the situation. And something else we talked about was how big drama like this in the high school feels to a student, right? And so I told my mom, this is just the worst thing ever. And she's like, that's small stuff. You may not feel as comfortable going to them for a resolution in comparison to handling it in the school. And I think it's just a last point, and I'm gonna maybe pass it over to my colleagues. When we're looking at the levels, I'm always thinking about, and this is just my opinion, being stacked. Just because you did a level 2, a level 3, and a level 4, you get the level 4. You know, we need to address all levels of the incident and why those things matter. I think sometimes we just shoot for the top and say this is the most egregious thing, and we kind of skip that even a level 1 or a level 2 has impact on people despite the intent. So those are my thoughts. Anything else?
I mean, the thing I would just add is just sort of thinking about, I think what you said, the motivation. Like, I almost feel like by the time you get to a scenario like this, it's too late. Whereas if you can almost like create that scenario with students beforehand, and maybe this is getting back to the circle, so I might be talking against myself, and I'm fully in support of going against myself. But I almost feel like that by the time you're, like, these are like all terrible, right? I mean, it's just terrible.
This is blackmail.
Right, I mean,
This is
it's
a
awful.
lot at the start, and I wrote it down, because.
Right, and so like, and I mean, I started the conversation being like, this is crazy, like this whole thing is crazy to me. But I almost feel like that sometimes you don't know, like, what is the student sort of motivation about like why you're having an issue with the bathroom, or why you're, you know, texting, or why you're bullying, or like I think that being able to have students perhaps act out these things before it actually occurs, so that you can understand how that might make someone feel, or how people might be impacted. Like, that to me feels very different than when this happens, it's like, I just kind of throw my hands up and like, bury myself in a corner, right? It's a pillow over my head,
It
so.
does bring us back to the film and the work that PE teachers do with our students, in self-control classes and in character development. So yes, absolutely being proactive does help. From our perspective, these are kids whose brains are not fully developed, and our job is to, try to help develop them. Even the ones who are committed the most degrees.
Is there anything about this situation that you have to report because
Very
of
good
what's going
question.
on?
So if you are familiar with the Title IX process in the US government, and that is specifically for sexual offenses in the education area, there is a reporting system from it, but you must have a complainant, and it can't be your friend. So it can't be an outside person doing good deeds for you. You have to come forward yourself. And then there is an investigation that ensues, and the way the process works, and because each administration gets to change it when they come into office, at one point, it had gotten to a point where people were like, they did this so that kids would not come forward because it was so, we first talk to your side, then we're gonna go and present what you said to the other side, and then they get a chance to rebut, and then we're gonna come back to you with what their rebuttal was, and then you have to address the rebuttal, and then you have to go. But yes, there's an official system, but there must be a complainant who is the primary person who.
So she went to her dean, but if she doesn't wanna file an official complaint,
Then it never reaches the Title IX court, and we will encourage and we will push, but yes. And that is something that I have said before, just in terms of our community, because we have had families who we have tried to get on the record to say what they know, and it's like, well, we don't want to really get involved. And I'm like, wow, these are children, they just wanted to stop.
What happens when Title IX disappears when the next administration kills the Department of Education?
So I don't know that it will die, but it may freeze where it was, because the reporting system is there unless they outlaw it. So just killing the department doesn't make this go away. The laws stay on the books unless it's unlawed.
Or the department, the non-existent Department of Education decides not to.
And just in the interest of time, I did want to just mention here, there were a couple of snags in this one. All being off campus, it brings up the topic of nexus, which I'm not gonna give the full definition, but there are two things that would bring the deans into a position where they could address this. Number one, we followed her home on the way home from school. The behavior education plan applies to and from school, but it also applies if whatever conduct occurred off campus has a detrimental effect to the school environment or the student being able to go about their school day, but it did in this case. If those two things were not present, this would be something that we would be referring back to parents and possibly law enforcement to deal with, because unfortunately it would not be under the umbrella of school discipline.
Thank you, David. Before we go on the circle, there's some thoughts I need you all to have in your mind as we're doing this work and then moving forward as well. So I'm going to repeat some things just for you to know. When Mr. Cassell said, this is a lot, this is a lot. And the people it's happening to are minors. And the people in this building, the 5 deans who have to confront this is their daily work. So they don't get to do the A+, they get these types of cases every day. And their life is to unpack it, try to match it up with things that they have tools to do, and then also change behavior, change mindset. And there's a lot of opinion about that as it's being done. And it is very hard to do that when you have all that's coming to you. You need good tools to use in order to accomplish the work. Because as you all heard as you went around here, there's a lot of feelings about what you're reading. But at the end of the day, these are young people who need help. And the help comes out differently because there's always 2 sides. And so what you read, like even the first thing says, a student reports to a dean that her ex-boyfriend is stalking her, that is one side. And we hear that and we say, he's stalking her. We don't know that yet. And then when the person comes in, they very rarely thought what they were doing was stalking. So they don't describe their own behavior that way. They were trying to have a conversation. And then and so they have to unpack all that. And what we may think is humor doesn't always present that way when you get all of the sides. The word bullying, we use a lot when we see kids being harassed by someone. Bullying is about persistence. Is this happening every day you come to school? Like, is someone meeting up with you and saying, hey, that girl, hey, you did it every day for 3 months? That's persistence. And unfortunately, that's the definition, is that it has to be persistent and perfect. So it can't be just how you felt because you heard it and it is awful. But the actual definition is saying there has to be some trail that's there. And I say that because we will say that to things that are happening to kids, like he did something to him, he bullied him. No, what he did, and this is about fixing the language, he pushed him today. What happened yesterday? What happened? Like, is this happening over and over? What are we seeing, and how do we make sure that's documented? So we have that.
Point out that bullying is a separate category in the DEP.
It is.
But if we think it doesn't qualify as bullying, it does not mean it's not going to be addressed.
Correct.
All these situations that could have been bullying are going to be addressed probably in the same way. Bullying category is about documentation.
Yes.
Making sure that the school is addressing anything pervasive in our culture. So of course, anything falls in that definition, it is categorized that way and put it out for those purposes, but regardless of which, the behavior is going to be addressed through the restorative processes.
And then the last thing before we get into the circle to close is the word bias. We all, even you in this room, brought to this conversation who you are, what you know, what you learned, what you've been taught. And you can hear that in the conversation that you have. And everyone in this room has a good EQ. We are all like emotionally charged about these things. But we also carry a bias that has to be placed somewhere when we're having discussions with the children to figure out what's actually going here so that we don't misrepresent anything. And so when you're thinking about this and we go to the spring, because not one tool is going to be able to solve all of this, we have to make sure that this is a good working document for human beings to use to make judgment calls on these incidents. And know that it's going to be sloppy and messy sometimes, but at the end of the day, each conversation you all had was, I don't know what to do if we can't get them to talk. Restoration work comes through talking. And that is the one place we as a school get hung up all the time. How do we get them to want to and agree to talking? Because all of this falls in terms of restoration if I can't get them to talk. Not force them to talk, because we can make kids stand in front of somebody and say, I'm sorry. But people know when it's not authentic. And so and then you cause more harm. So how do we do this so that we can encourage people and encourage families to do this with us, right? Because it becomes better if families are saying, go do this thing versus, you're not getting my baby to tell me that, right? So let's just think about this, because sometimes I want to make sure we're realistic about what we're asking this tool to do when human beings use the tool. Okay, we're gonna go to the circle. I know. I've got to limit our words. So you can always give you 2 words and make it difficult for you because you gotta think that. So one of the things that we usually or sometimes associate with justice has been this idea in the past of a pound of flesh. Like that's when we feel better. If you think death penalty, some people thought the death penalty would make people feel better. You just saw the person who caused you harm, to die, and then they realize I don't feel any better because my loved one is still gone. So when we think of this work that we're trying to do here with our students, And we're trying to separate ourselves from this idea of needing justice to be a pound of flesh, right? But being something more productive for the growth of children. I would like you to give us two words on what justice means to you, given the conversation that we just had. What justice would mean for you, 1 or 2 words, cannot be a sentence, has to be 1 or 2 words, given the work that we just did. And yes, I know that's challenging, and I'm gonna go to David first because he's gonna show us how.
Growth and education.
One or two.
Feeling resolution?
Problem solving.
Better future.
The root of it.
Maturity accelerator. Greater empathy.
Feeling heard.
Understanding.
Non-vindictive.
Fairness and restoration.
Empathic understanding. Thank you so kindly. This is always a highlight of my week, even when I sometimes think it's not going to be because I'm so tired. But I appreciate this because this is where I start to believe that things are possible from hearing your voice. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful.
Linda, David, thank you so much for tonight. This is another terrific program, so I would appreciate how the hard work that goes into preparing these scenarios and being so thoughtful about them, and they're not easy to write. There's a lot of subtlety in them, so they're so well crafted. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight, and particularly those who came last month to see the movie. I really appreciate you coming out to see that as well. We didn't talk about it very much tonight. I think it ended up being a little bit different, in the movie itself. We thought it was going to be still worthwhile and valuable, and I'm glad that so many came. We don't meet in December, we don't meet in January, so we'll be back here in February, but that gives us time to meditate on what Linda just said. I think that what you just noted is really important, but one of the things that the BEP maybe could do better, and one of the things that we could do as a school better is encouraging that restorative conversation. And we are getting better at that, at bringing the students together for those sort of conversations, but we're not nearly to the point where we could be. And I think that that could improve the culture climate of the school, and that was much more pervasive. Like, we're more successful in doing that. So how do we do that? And let's make something for us all to give us some thoughts to several months. All right, let me say the magic words. I think we're going to move to adjourn the CCP meeting at 7:40 after 50. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared.